I'd like to thank everybody for being here. We'll call this meeting to order. It's our community council meeting. Let's go around and get everybody's name.
Hi, my name is Lisa Slusner, and I work in the municipal clerk's office.
Dan Burgess, Assembly Community Council President.
Al Tamani, Avalute Community Council Chair.
John Cecil, Planner with the Community Development Department.
Al Mills, Paul, UACC.
Merle Akers, Merle Akers.
Lance Powell, Mid-Hillside Community Council.
Kathy Gleason, Turnagain Community Council.
Darrell Hess, Municipal Ombudsman.
Big Training Assembly.
Tim Steele Assembly. You guys can all come up to the table if you
Come
want.
on up to the table, would you please? I won't bite today. Maybe tonight,
There's a
but not this morning.
Well, have you had your shots?
No, I'm sorry. The military gave me shots against, let's see, black plague, whooping cough, diphtheria, yellow fever. I've had most of them.
Okay,
Some-
I feel better now.
How about the anti-contrary shot?
Anyway, we're here to discuss this community council project we're working on. I want to lead off with this immediate release relative to community councils. Lisa?
If I'm gonna kick off the meeting, I'm gonna kick it off halfway in the dark. So I'm gonna go over here and turn off half of
That'll
our
be like our
lights.
meeting in the assembly tonight. We will be in the dark.
Okay, just so that you can see this a little bit better. I just to reintroduce myself, my name is Lisa Slusner, and I work as a records coordinator for the municipal clerk's office. And of course, I happen to also be their IT coordinator. So, and in that capacity in the office, I'm staff support to the Anchorage Assembly. So just to let you know that the municipal clerk, the ombudsman, and have asked me to develop this webpage, and in support of the Assembly Committee for Community Councils, we've developed a Community Councils webpage. Now, what I'm going to do is just show you a couple of ways to access it, but I think probably I'll let Daryl give some of the details, but I just want to navigate it for you here. So this is our home page for the municipal website. The first way that you can access community councils is very simply right there under your government, community councils. If you're on the Assembly webpage, on the left side navigation, we'll also have that link to the community councils right there. So this is the opening page, and this is meant to be the dynamic page. This is going to be your page that changes as your topics and issues and subjects change, and it's completely driven by what's going on within the community at the time, what your topics of interest are. So we've titled this items of interest, and for instance, right now we have the latest draft of the ordinance for amending 2.40. So if you click on there, that draft will come up, and so people will have access to that and be able to print that. We get a lot of requests, for printing different documents, but this way it makes it directly accessible. And of course, there's your attachment right there. And what we'll do with this page is, as items come up, we will just keep current things on here, but just sort of move them down and just make it not stagnant, I guess.
Who manages the page?
Well, it's going to be driven by your Assembly, Community Councils, Committee, and by Community Councils, in that you will give, I will implement things, but you will give me those topics to implement. So, or put on, yes, sorry.
So bottom line, who will manage it?
Clerk's
Community
office.
Clerk's office.
Mhm.
The municipality doesn't give access to its website to outside entities.
And you'll notice on the right, there's some other information here. You have your Assembly Councils. I am not doing anything.
It's all
I
right.
wasn't even touching it.
Lisa, it's fine, man. Okay?
Okay, so here we are. So I'm going to put my hands way back here. On the right here, you have just a little blurb about your Assembly Community Councils Committee. And if you want to access those other committees of the Assembly, that's going to take you right to that page. And of course, you'll have the information about your Community Councils Committee as well. Let me go up and shut that one down. You know what, why am I looking up there? That's probably my problem. And then if you scroll down a little bit more, you have your link to the Federation. So that's going to take you directly to the Federation.
Now, we are not responsible for your Federation website. That's up to you guys.
And who will give the info to the city clerk?
Who,
Well-
Lisa? The Federation or the community council presidents or who?
Both.
So community
And the
council
committee
presidents
too.
can call the city clerk and say, hey, I'd like you to do this?
Yes.
Well,
Just
I,
send an
I,
email or something.
no, I think we need to be very careful. This webpage isn't intended to replace the Federation's
Right,
website.
yeah, that's what I was
It's
wondering.
more government, if you go back to the page, it's more what the city is doing, what the Assembly is doing, items of interest. There may be items of interest to community councils, ordinances are things that may be listed on here.
So it's a hierarchy. You've got Muni, then you got FCC, then you got the individual council sites.
Well, it goes back to the relationship. There is no,
There's no relation between.
Between the
Assembly
feder-
and the Federation. Our relationship by charter is with the community council.
Right, and I'm thinking, okay, there's the FCC webpage, and then there's a community council site that you can go to from that webpage. And then there's this, so how many do the community councils need to supply information to?
well, part of this is, if there is information that the city believes that community councils might be of interest to them, or educate them, or be helpful, we believe that we have an obligation as the city to provide
Sure.
that.
Yeah, that makes
Because
sense.
the charter and ordinance recognizes community councils. The Federation is a private nonprofit
Right.
that is contracted by the Assembly to provide services to community councils. So this fulfills, this highlights the unique relationship in the local government process, the unique place of community councils in that local government process.
And
It
so-
doesn't replace the Federation webpage. It's never gonna have everything that the Federation webpage has on it. But it's things that the city is doing that may be of interest to community councils. And like what is a community council? Click on what is a community council. This explains what community councils are, how they were established.
A lot of times we have people telling us, I don't know I'm a part of a community council.
Right.
And what we're trying to do is show the public how important community councils are. Because if we don't let people know they exist, when they come up to the community website, I want them to see what a community council is.
Has this got maps or boundaries on it?
No,
Not yet.
That's what I was gonna bring up. I think what would be really helpful, to not even have to click on what is a community council, is to be able to.
Where do you
click on
live, and it would bring up your
Click on
community
a
council.
council
Well,
boundary
the
map.
FCC site is gonna do that, right?
Yes.
Well, but I mean, if people aren't going to the FCC site, they
But they're-
click on this site.
But at least,
On this
if that's what
site,
you want.
I would like to see that they can go ahead and click on, where am I, what council am I?
it's just simple.
A
We-
council boundary map would be
Lisa,
appropriate.
could we work on that?
The
then?
simple way to do that is we're gonna put it, this is not complete, it's evolving,
Well, that's-
is we're gonna have a link to My Neighborhood.
Yes.
The best tool
That's our
that you're
first
talking about
rollout
is My
to you
Neighborhood.
guys.
Well, I still think people might go, I don't even know what my neighborhood means. What does that mean?
So you click on the link.
So, I'm.
I'll send them in to you.
This is just my opinion.
Yes.
I think websites should be very user-friendly. I think a lot of Munia's website is not user-friendly. I'm trying to think of ways to make it as user-friendly as possible. When you click on community councils, that first page that pops up, why not have a link to council map boundaries? Not, well, click on My Neighbor and then click on this, and then you find a map.
So we
and
have a
then,
page under
you know.
development that is the maps, and you'll be able to go to a map and click a button on it, and it'll take you to your council.
And that's fine, I understand, but I'm
Yeah.
I'm
So you can
thinking
go to
that we
that
don't
page
need
if
to
you
be
wanted.
redundant here. I mean, somewhere in that page, you could have a message. You want to know what council you're in, then go to the FCC site.
Okay, if you have suggestions, email me the suggestions and we will look at them as the page evolves. We're launching the page today. This is what it is today, but we're more than open to suggestions on how to improve
I
it.
don't wanna have to email it, I just told you what I think, so
Okay.
that's fine.
Thank you, Kathy.
And this is just a shell, a vehicle. because I can appreciate what Kathy's saying, and we can have that link there. But the important thing about the opening page is for it to stay a dynamic page, a changing page, so that when you go there, it doesn't have stale information.
Yes, Julia.
Going back to your, question about how many websites community councils have to furnish, I think that the concept of this was that it would be a resource for community councils and not an obligation to stuff.
Yeah.
And so.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the way I would look at this is the Muni's admin view of community councils.
Essentially,
And if anything is to come to it, it'll come from the FCC, is that correct?
No, I think it'll
We
come-
won't be sending emails through this to community councils.
No.
This
yes.
is information, click on what is a community council. The point of this is to explain the relationship, try to explain the relationship. Everybody's confused, what is a community council?
Right.
Not everybody
Why do
knows.
we have them, right?
Why do we have them? How were they established?
Yeah.
It has a link to the charter. And then we're researching all the historical documents we can find, ordinances, resolutions, memorandums regarding community councils, and we're gonna post them on there. We have a great memorandum, assembly memorandum from 1978 we're gonna put up there. We have the legal opinion from the municipal attorney regarding jurisdiction over community councils, the assembly's jurisdiction over community councils. So we're gonna put documents like that on this website. It's a way to help better explain the relationship, because it explains what community councils are, how they were established, has historical documents, and then if you go to the Federation on the front page where it talks about the Federation, it explains that they're a private 501c3 that's contracted by the Assembly to provide services to community councils, has a link to their website, has a copy of the grant agreement with the city, and their contact information and address. So it's very limited. It's not meant to replace the Federation website.
Go ahead, Tim.
But it's got to be a website for the public to be able to identify their relationship with the community council.
Right.
So there's got to be a link or the data for a list of councils, boundary descriptions, and a location and contact information. So they've got to be able to get to those things from here, so that
They can through the Federation. We can better highlight that, but the Federation website has all that information.
I think it's great myself, Mark Butler. I think it's wonderful. The more information, the better. When I was at the airport and was the webmaster out there, we always tried to think, which way are people going to try to get information?
Yeah.
A student, how are they going to get in? And a passenger from overseas trying to figure out about a taxi cab service when they get off the plane. So try to figure out each way that information's there. So if there's 10 ways to get the information, 10 different routes, they'll all be used, and they're all good, because it's one chunk of data, but the more people have access to different logics and ways of getting there, the better. It's my opinion. So I think this is great.
Mark, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I was going through some old correspondence the other day, and they had 2011 on it. How long is this, what you're working on, going to have to take place? Is there an end in sight, a scheduled date?
Our year, end of the year,
End
is
of
what
the
I've
year?
been told.
Okay.
That's my drop dead,
Good.
or shoot mark.
Was that 30 some odd days? 40?
It's 60 days.
Okay, no, that's
Yeah,
fine.
and so the more this stuff, the more good stuff I see here, I can grab some of that and put it on ours as well. Again, it's good common information, so if they get through it through FCC, if they get through it through this way. And our page that shows, you click on it and it takes you, you see a big map and you click on it in that area, up it pops to that, to ALCC or to whichever turn again. That's great too, and they can use that map then. It's all common, all good.
And I think I've heard some good ideas. One of the things we can highlight on here is clicking on the Federation's website if you want to sign up for your council's
Yep.
Right.
distribution list. So we can call out some of that, having a link to the maps or
Oh, yeah.
to my neighborhoods. That's why I said, so if you have ideas, anybody has ideas, send them to us.
And when we put our stuff up, then, and you see what you like, you guys, you don't have to ask permission, can make a link to that page on the FCC, whatever feels comfortable.
And that was the intent, because
I think it's
some
wonderful.
people go to muni.org to find out about community
Yeah.
councils, some people go to the Federation, so.
And that was when we were at the State of Alaska at the airport, the state people for a while said, everything has to go through State of Alaska dot whatever it was. And then, you know, those of us had to defend ourselves, said, well, no one, you know, who's a passenger goes to say, oh, I'll go to the State of Alaska to figure out what's happening at Anchorage International Airport. You go to Anchorage International Airport. So if you go that way as a passenger, that's great. If you come down the other way, it all works. So I think it's wonderful. Brilliant. Hurrah.
Well, Lisa, thank you very much. We appreciate all your efforts on this. And I really do want to see, you know, what community council do I live in? We have a little thing, a little sentence that you hit that, your address, you put your address in, it tells you what community council you're in. That would be nice.
Ours is a map one, okay? We haven't figured out how to type in your address and have it go to one. Because that means taking a database
I know.
and then put it to that.
The quickest, simplest solution, Dick, in the interim would be to have a link to My Neighborhood. Because if you go to My Neighborhood, you type in your address and select political or school, whatever, it'll show you who your elected representatives are, your assembly members, what your community council is.
But that's not intuitive necessarily.
Right, but short term and without spending thousands of dollars, it's a quick fix.
Yeah, I just don't want them to have to go to Federation in order to find out who their community council is.
No, you could put a
what their
link to
map
My
is,
Neighborhood.
what their-
Be right on this page.
Being that this is a new website, I think we can use it as a training tool for people. So although My Neighborhood has been up there for forever, we can bring it down here and say, how do I find out what community council I live in? And then put it right there.
Right.
And it doesn't mean it has to stay there forever, but we educate them and then we allow them access there.
So is this public now? Is this out?
Yes.
Lisa, is this public now?
This is public,
Great.
this is live. And
We'll
I do
grab
have a
some of
press
those
release
links
to
ourselves.
pass out.
You what?
We'll write some of the links
on our
ourselves.
website. I mean, it's
Yeah,
all good.
it all ties together. And he just made links to it on his, just now.
But you know, we all care about community councils. This is our effort to help community councils. So I think it's working.
What do you think about moving the Federation up and the committee down?
Yeah, we don't need to.
I think that would be fine. Move the Federation up, move us down. I don't care about our committee.
Because I think the Federation information is more dynamic and
I
needs
think
to be
so.
at the top.
No problem with that.
Oh, he's already.
Hey, Lisa?
Did you already?
Oh, yeah,
have
already
this
got
one? Okay. all right,
Lisa,
I'm
we have
sorry.
one suggestion. That would be to take the Federation, move it up, move our community council committee down.
Okay.
I'm not concerned with our committee as I am with people getting into the Federation.
You can even take that, put it as a link.
That's not too much work, man.
No, that's not too much work at all, and that's a great suggestion. And I think originally, putting it that way was to, again, an educational tool. You know, what is the Assembly Community Councils Committee? And then, now that that's there, switching them to make the access a priority makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Anything else from the group? Hopefully this will help the community councils.
I'm gonna leave this
It's a
up.
work in progress.
2 thumbs up.
I will put the lights on.
Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Daryl, you want to go through the bylaws with us?
I would defer to Julia as
Whoever.
the changes.
Chair, before we get into that, can I make a request?
You what?
Can I make a request?
Yes, ma'am.
I think this was mentioned maybe at our last meeting. It would be very, very helpful, especially by my meeting Thursday night, Pat Kernigan's meeting Thursday night, is to have a summary of the key changes in the code that are being proposed. Kind of just a one-page summary to highlight, so that people have a good feel for, instead of having to read all the pages and so forth, it would be very, very helpful. And I would appreciate that. And I need it by Thursday.
You'll be talking about tennis on Thursday.
Well, that's on the agenda too, but so is this, so,
Thank you. We'll try
thank
to do
you.
that.
I would appreciate that, because I don't want to have to go page by page and try and summarize.
Julia?
It takes too long.
Give a one-page, synopsis, it's called.
Now, this is default bylaws.
Yeah.
I don't think there were.
So I'm not sure that we had actually, as a group, made it through the default bylaws, so.
We haven't got to the bylaws yet. That
Right,
was the
but
reason
let's
we're
start with the bylaws. So it's not so much about highlighting changes, because
No, I
I think
meant
the
the code.
changes were all
the code.
You do want to go through.
No, I want a summary.
I know what you want, and
Yeah.
so
Oh, sorry.
I don't know if I'm gonna be, we'll see who's gonna do that. I will not have anything like that for you by Thursday, because I have a number of other things on my plate,
She
but I
has some
thought
hot
that
things
what,
she's doing for us right now.
what Daryl asked me to start out this meeting with, right now, are changes to the bylaws.
Yeah, but that was, the summary page was a request made at our last meeting. That was discussed at our last meeting.
We'll see there.
So that's, it was
So
more
I
of a
just don't know,
reminder than a.
yeah, I don't know that I have that, so, on my plate, I'm just telling you that.
Okay, thank you.
But I have a very limited time with us today, and so if we want to start out by talking about the default bylaws,
How
or
much
you
time
want to
do you have,
go over
Julia?
again the changes to
No.
the code.
Bylaws, please, let's start,
Okay,
please.
so let's start with the bylaws. And so I'm not sure that
Al on
we have,
bylaws.
Okay.
that we have changes.
I want to let Julia start and go through this. Go ahead, Julia.
I don't know that we have changes to discuss, because I think that most of those were internal, because I don't think we've ever gone through this, so I don't know, I don't know how, it may be more efficient, first of all, have people read the bylaws? Part, okay, so then why don't we start with concerns and questions about the bylaws?
Julia, why don't you just call on the people that have questions and concerns with bylaws? You're addressing them.
Okay.
Al's the first one. Al?
Yeah.
I think on page number 2, receive and review your notices to the council from municipal departments. I would like to see added into there municipal departments and its subsidiaries.
Okay, so can you call out, you're on page 2, and then you're under what section?
Section E.
Section E, okay.
Right, I would like to see the municipality departments and its subsidiaries, like AWWU, Port, ML&P, all of those entities, because a lot of times, you don't get notices of what they're going to do, and they don't feel like that they have to respond, I don't believe. And I think that would correspond also to page 12 of 15 on the municipal ordinance on section C. Make sure that we emphasize the municipalities, departments, and subsidiaries.
And again, I'm having trouble following you because of the sound here. So the second place is,
What page is the second one, Al?
On page 12 of 15 of the ordinance,
oh, in the ordinance. Okay, I got the first part. Okay, so
item C.
So are we on the ordinance or the
what,
bylaw?
we're
He's
on
in the ordinance.
Bouncing back and forth.
Okay, we're bouncing back and forth. He has a change on page 2 of the bylaws under E6. And then he is pointing out that that would correspond to a similar change, and then you're gonna tell me it's on page 12,
Item C.
item C. Communication, and where do we have that?
What line, Al?
Item C, probably the first 2 or 3 sentences, to make sure that we have the municipalities, departments, and subsidiaries in there.
But it's, well.
All right, so
useful
I'm gonna make a note there, and then this is my concern about that, is that the municipality doesn't really have subsidiaries anymore. All of the enterprise organizations, what they're called now, like MLP and all that, they're no longer,
So are they then departments?
they're departments now.
Okay, that's
And
fine
so,
then. Right.
and so, but we may wanna add someplace on the bylaws, because they are sort of called enterprise organizations now.
Right, okay.
We could, just to make that clear so that you know that, then if they change and become independent corporations again, they would still be enterprise organizations, so it would cover
Okay.
everything, okay?
That
How's that
would be
sound?
fine.
And so that, I think that's a good catch, okay. What else on bylaws?
Kathy?
Can I recommend we just go page by page? So that
All
we
right,
don't jump around?
all right, so let's
That's what I'm
start
trying to
with
help.
the name,
And-
Article
and
1.
One thing I want people to keep in mind, these bylaws are only gonna apply if the council fails to adopt new bylaws within 7 months.
That's a long period of time.
Okay, I prefer to go by article, so if we're gonna go like that. So does
Whichever way you
anybody
wanna
have
do it, Julia.
a concern about Article 1? That's your name. Okay, what about Article 2, the way that boundaries are described here? You think that anything new on that?
So
Okay.
if there will be some changes on that, because you do have John, you do have a expected change, at least one, of Government Hill, and that will be voted on by the Assembly in the next 6 months or so?
Yeah, that's-
What are you doing to Government Hill?
Well, there's 3 or 4 potential changes, and that's one that reflects I think the BLM property that.
The sale of a part of the base to the port, and then now that area is now part of the Government Hill Community Council, where the base was not. And there
Okay,
was some
so
potential other ones.
So in boundaries, then what we want to do is somehow say, not only the 2003, AO 2003-11, but subsequent
Or as amended.
code or something like that, yeah, as amended. As amended, because you're saying that there could be amendments that actually don't go through this boundary review, but instead are just by code because of transactions? Is that
No,
what you're thinking?
my understanding is that the boundary review, as you've indicated here, is subject to the decennial census
Yes.
action, which then every 10 years required by charter or the ordinance to review the boundaries.
Right, so these Mike, I guess my question is, the ones that Mark is talking about, and that you've talked about on Government Hill, are they changes that are going through the process that's noted here, the
Yes.
boundary review
Yes,
process?
the boundary review process,
Okay,
correct.
are there changes that anybody anticipates that don't go through the boundary review process? Okay,
There could be some, between those 10-year periods down the road, and the Assembly has the right to change those boundaries.
So there can just be a disclaimer
Right.
or other assembly action.
well, that's where Mark's talking about as amended in code, so we got a couple things.
Whatever the
we
words
can-
are,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want to take
So
those.
I've captured a couple things here to just make sure that we're accurate in portraying that. Okay, Article 3.
Just one question on that. On the age, resident 16 years and older now, this is the template, but if you have your own bylaws, you can modify it as you desire.
Well, that's not quite right, in that if the code passes and requires 16 and above to be members, then you can't pass a bylaw that's in violation of code.
I missed 2 meetings, because I had thought way back when we had discussed that, and it was,
All right, well, I'll let Dick and the policymakers address that for you.
Now, if we have in the code that 16, you can't raise the age to 16. 16 is the minimum age.
So it's in the code draft right now at 16, but it hasn't passed the Assembly, the full body yet.
If it passes the Assembly, it's not me, it's not him. If it passes the Assembly, then it's written in, and that's subject to a change on the floor of the Assembly. Somebody
In
could
which
say,
case,
"I don't want
this would have to
16-year-olds."
change also.
Just 18-year-olds, so. But once the Assembly passes and becomes law, it's 16.
Let me ask a question. You mentioned something about if we don't adopt, Eagle River Community Council, if we don't adopt bylaws or have bylaws by a certain time within 7 months,
7 months.
then these are the defaults. But what I just heard was our bylaws can't necessarily alter these. I mean, we don't agree with this age of 16. And if it passes the Assembly, then we have to have this in our bylaws. And I guess at this point, we need to address our concern to the Assembly that the 16 doesn't work for our council. Is that correct?
Right.
Well, but I think the decision was made by the committee to move forward the draft So there will be a public hearing
In front of
when
the
the ordinance
assembly.
comes to the assembly, and then your council could show up and testify or submit a resolution.
When will that be?
Probably sometime in December. I'm not fast tracking this thing right now.
So
We're
we
taking our
haven't
time.
introduced it, it hasn't been introduced yet.
The reason why I
If,
asked,
wait a minute, let me just finish one more thing. If this part of it, the part one, the ordinance, is approved by the assembly and says 18 or older, then with that amendment in there so that it doesn't pass, because somebody could have a floor amendment and be responsive, then this will also have to have a corresponding amendment. So you will not be stuck with default bylaws that say 16 if the code minimum requirement is only 18. Right? I mean, I just wasn't sure if you got that. Okay, now, yes.
well, like in our case, we currently have 18 in our bylaw. But we're looking at the fiduciary responsibility, you have to be 18 for that. And so that's why we're trying to keep a line there, because obviously they can't hold a position of responsibility if they're not 18. So why can't we just say, 16 unless.
It's further in.
It's further in there within the ordinance.
Code, unless, well, okay.
Right, so fiduciary,
16
we
on-
handled someplace else. Fiduciary, we handled someplace
Right, I saw
else.
it, yeah. But I mean, up here, 16 unless, local council will determine.
That would be exactly what Daryl and Dick were talking about and that this gentleman brought up. If you have a concern when this goes in front of the assembly, then that's the time to make that concern. As far as the sponsors, here, the drafting instructions I have was to make it mandatory for 16.
Mandatory.
Okay?
Yeah, and then just this discussion brings up something that I wrote, when all is said and done. So once code passes and then default bylaws are conforming to whatever the city passes as far as code changes, it would be extremely helpful for community councils at some point after that, to have the set of default bylaws, just as a marked up version for our own internal use, to highlight which parts of the default bylaws conform to code, and if you're looking to amend or take this and revise it a bit, what you can't change, and what parts are discretionary, and the council could potentially change those in their own, for their own purpose. I mean, just when all is said and done, that would be
I think that
extremely helpful so that we know.
The ordinance dictates, and so.
Right, but
So
she's
that no-
asking from a non-lawyer point of view and for people who haven't been participating as all of we had. And so this is my response to you about that. I think that's an excellent idea. I think that it should be combined. I heard you when you made the request before about having something that would do the transition. But since this isn't even introduced yet, it didn't make it to my list for this Thursday. And so I think that by the time that this is introduced, not so much after all is said and done, but at the time that's introduced, we should have a document with it that does those two things, that talks about the changes in code, and then also highlights on the exhibit those provisions for our use too, just like this linkage that we just talked about, that if the assembly changes one, then the other one's gonna have to do, that would highlight in the bylaws those things that are linked to mandatory code.
Yeah.
And so I think that you can consider it a commitment for me that I'll be working on that. I'm not gonna have it by Thursday.
Okay, well, I think the reason why I put it on my Turn Again Community Council agenda Thursday is because I thought that the muni code changes, that this ordinance was gonna be introduced tonight.
It's not gonna be good, so we moved it back a bit.
Okay, so
We've had
never
other
mind.
hot projects.
I'll probably
We gotta get through this review.
take
Yeah.
that off my agenda for Thursday.
Okay.
Or
Right.
maybe.
And
Moving on to our-
that's because to be introduced for a meeting, it would have had to been completed and submitted
Never mind.
a couple of Fridays ago.
We haven't
And
well
so-
yet, Kathy.
Thank you
And
for
so-
clarifying that, yes, I don't wanna rush
next
anything,
month.
it's not appropriate.
Maybe.
Okay, all right.
Which one you on?
So, we are on,
You on purpose?
we finished up with 3, was that the only that comment came in when we were asking for comments for 3. Okay, so purpose, Article 4. No additions or questions? Okay, so Article 5, functions.
I just had a small one on B5. If we could insert disposal of municipal land, comma, including disposals requiring voter approval, because TCC weighs in on potential proposed disposal of land, even if it doesn't require a vote of, a vote of people, like
Well-
on parkland.
Right, so this disposal of municipal land requiring voter approval, that's the title section of 2530.035. I mean,
Okay.
so I'm not willing to change
No,
the
then
title.
okay.
But if there is if there's something else that you, that I've missed on the listing here, that is that you comment on these other things, then give me the code site for that, or whatever you do about that. Okay.
This- That would be covered by 6. I took this straight out of the draft ordinance. And, these are default bylaws, and councils can word all kinds. I've seen some bylaws that are 15 pages, some that are 3. So I tried to limit this to, most of it is code requirements. And a lot of this language is straight out of the draft code. So we could add all kinds of things in here, but I thought the intent was to make the default bylaws as simple as possible. You could put, instead of going to H under here, I've seen some councils that probably go to J or L or M. So this is we're trying to limit these and make them as simple as possible.
I agree, so that's fine.
Basic
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for clarifying.
Okay, is there something in, just from a drafting point of view, we already have the one that we're gonna do in number 6 for enterprise organizations, which is our catch-all. Is there some other wording that you can think of, Kathy, or get back to me on, that would make 6 more meaningful to be the sweeper position to pick up all these oddball things that are done?
I'm just not that familiar with Muni code to kind of think of specifics, so.
Well, it's
I
not
think
so much a
Daryl's-
muni code thing, it would be a description, just like Al added enterprise organization. So you don't have to think about it, you don't have to come up with something now. I'm not looking for a code site, before I asked for a code site, because I didn't know what you wanted. But if they're just sort of some general things, if it's other land use, or, we can massage number 6 to
Right.
know, to better function as the overall catch-all, and then we'll go ahead and make that same change, because Daryl lifted these from our code, so I just leave you with that.
Well, I think the key here is E refers to receiving, when you receive notices for the municipality. Councils comment on a lot of things that they may not be noticed on, but, are items of interest to the council. So this section specifically refers to reviewing notices you receive and commenting on them. So.
Pending any light bulb that comes in my head, which is unlikely. I think the number 6, it pretty well does then go ahead. It's general enough to encompass just about anything else that would come up as far as municipal notices, so I can't think of anything,
Okay, Article 6, membership. We talked about the 16 years of age as in here and in the draft code being mandatory and subject to change, because we're just going over what's gonna be as submitted. Anything else under membership?
Like B, I was thinking, second paragraph where it says the roster at any council regular or special meeting and has attained the age of, I guess, 16, because you can have people come in there who are 15 or, you know, not, they're signing the roster, but they're not of legal age, not of membership age.
Most people have a box that says member or not.
But they may not.
But that's covered on A, first line.
So,
It's covered what? What was
The
that?
age thing is, he's saying is covered on A on the first line. So maybe you don't need to be.
Doesn't matter if you sign the register, you gotta be 16 to be a member.
Might make a suggestion. Sir, you said earlier your council was against a 16-year-old. Now, later on in these bylaws, they make a reference to it. They would be put in positions that are non-fiduciary and non-signatory. Would that be okay with you guys?
Well, no, our bylaws currently say 18. and-
No, I'm just thinking, if you have to change to 16 with that language, would you accept that?
Well, if we have to change it, I don't think we have an option. When we come back, we're gonna have a meeting next week, when we come back with our comments on this, we're gonna say we don't agree with the 16 being a member.
I guess my point.
But certainly, if it's 18 in fiduciary, I mean, that's certainly better than having 16 in fiduciary. When we have two positions that are at large, one for each high school, but they're non-voting members, and they can be on the board, and they can be under the age of 18, but, you know, those are just positions for the two high schools.
So,
My point is, if you make a reference as soon as you can that the 16-year-olds are going to be non-fiduciary and non-signatory, it might delete or get rid of a lot of argument. 'Cause
membership is separate from officers.
Right.
It's
So
a separate, and that's actually covered, but you're a member.
What I'm
if you're
saying is-
16.
Go ahead.
But you're a member if you're 16.
And
But
the other requirement.
back to the original question under B, we could add, I agree, it may need clarified there. We could put a person who qualifies for membership or meets the qualifications for membership is a voting member. So
They can vote.
it could be clarified.
And I think the important thing is between 16 and 18, non-fiduciary and non-signatory, right? I think, again.
Well, but that's covered under officers.
But if it's covered as much as you can, it's going to eliminate a lot of debate.
Right. Well, but once again, these bylaws will apply if a council doesn't get their bylaws into the assembly and approved.
Right,
within
Daryl, I think what
7
he's
days.
talking about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that maybe in B, where it says, and this would address that concern too, in B where it says a person, so we would put a person meeting A of this section, because that's where you have the thing, and subject to wherever we have it, in D or whatever it is, in the other place. Yeah, it's in the ordinance, but we'll try and make this consistent, internally consistent. And so that way we don't have to elongate this, but we can have some internal references within here that would just have, because generally you don't want to have two provisions that could potentially conflict, and so that's what you're talking
And
about.
I had the same thought, 16-year-olds, my gosh, but when I read later on that it was non-signatory and non-fiduciary positions, then okay.
It's participation.
Yeah, right, a chance for leadership development maybe, and
Well, there's
that,
some of these kids too that have a high school assignment.
Yes.
Get involved in a local government thing.
yeah.
I want them to start learning at community councils.
No, I think that's a good
Because I
idea.
don't want to lose them.
Yeah.
We do too often.
And I think we all agree with that, it's just that, you know, whether they can make the major decisions, you know, we encourage them also to come on and sit at the meeting or whatever.
So for now, it looks like they can vote on officers, but they can't be a treasurer, fiduciary, or they can't anything each signatory. That sounds fair,
Yeah.
you know, but I think that needs to be emphasized so that
So people don't get stopped right
Yeah.
here and go
don't
blah,
get
blah,
stuck
blah,
on
blah.
that 16-year
Okay.
age.
Okay, all right, how about, and so we understand about how the voluntary dues work in C.
Well,
'cause
that's
that
a
was-
question I have.
Whoops, sorry.
address you guys a little bit here. Article A, 5A, and you list 4 IDs that are acceptable.
Are you on 6A? Where are you, sir?
He's on
Article
6A.
5 membership, page 3,
Article
A,
6.
Article 6A.
Okay, 6A.
and you state there valid driver's license and Alaska professional license and on into the night. I want to know why we have to have that. And the other thing is, if you're going to have that, how about other licenses? How about voter ID? How about Alaska ID? I don't quite understand what you want there, but if you're going to have that in there, then you also need to have someplace in here how you're going to verify all that, I would think. So I don't know what kind of licenses, does pilot's license require, fall into that category?
This is just for business owners and nonprofits, not for everybody.
It's not an Alaska driver's license, it's a business license. Residents qualify because they live there, so they would have multiple ways of proving where they reside. But for business owners and nonprofit organizations, one of the things that Julie and I looked at, and we talked with the committee about, is how can you prove that an organization is a legitimate organization, that 5 people aren't going to say, I'm a nonprofit and I want to have a voting membership in an organization. So we looked at it, if you have a business license, if you have a professional license, like Al doesn't need a business license, he's an insurance agent, he has a professional license. Are you incorporated under Alaska law? And we tried to figure out how to cover religious organizations. Because when we researched, we found out that some religious organizations do not file for tax exempt status. It's against their beliefs. But you do not have to file as a 501c3 to be recognized by the IRS. So if they qualify for recognition, if they're a religious organization, when we went back and we looked at this, we realized that we kind of left churches out. So that's why tax exempt status under federal law is actually for religious organizations and churches. And many community councils have churches that are very active in their community councils. So, it's just a way to prove that an organization, it's some sort of a qualifier, because it's easy to prove where you live, but how do you prove if you're a legitimate organization that should be a member of a community council?
And I don't know, I can't imagine why I didn't think of this before, but when I was reviewing this again, just in the context of reviewing the bylaws, what about the airport? I mean, they're in our community council boundary, they're in Sand Lake's community council boundary, but they're not, are they considered a business?
They're tax exempt.
Or a non-profit organization?
You're a government
Or
agency.
a-
Are government agencies allowed?
So I mean, if somebody, which
Could-
we've
could-
actually never had, believe it or not, if John Perrin came to our meeting and said, I consider myself a member because the airport is within the council boundary. And frankly, I've always considered anybody that works, comes to the airport a member, but they never vote on anything.
So I don't think that's happened in our community council either.
Yeah, but I mean, since it's such a large part of our council boundaries, and the potential is there for somebody in the future from the airport to say, I want recognition as a member of your council, where do they fall in?
So if MLFD has a substation, then somebody from MLFD can vote on your.
City Hall could be, there could be one vote for City Hall on downtown issues. Is that, so government
We're
agencies
getting
are
far
allowed?
afield.
Well, but we may
I
be
know what
getting
you
far
mean.
afield, but the airport is not far afield. I'm asking specifically
Yeah,
about the airport.
So,
Railroad, big agencies. National Park
when we
Service.
did the research on this, we found nothing in the charter or in prior legislation that tied community council membership to any government organization.
Okay.
And so we did not put that in there. I would suggest that should your community council want to have its own bylaws and you have, and you vote to approve some kind of a special membership category for the airport, that nobody's going to object to that for the reasons that you stated. But it's not a mandatory
Okay, so
thing for
as
government.
written now, if somebody from, and we adopted these, the airport would say, I would like, I think
I'd
the
make a
airport
note
should
in
have a
your bylaws,
representative.
because of the significance of the airport in
Then-
our area, they have a vote.
We could, I mean, but as, if we just adopt what's written here and we don't amend them, we'd have to say, I'm sorry, no.
No, I
therefore
think that
it
what
would
you
be
could
allowed.
say is that we're gonna, as Daryl said, I mean, the state's tax exempt.
So you think technically they
And
can fall
so,
into that?
I think that you could vote as a community council to say, we wanna offer special membership to blah, 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 and we're gonna bring them in under the tax exempt status
Okay.
as a government agency.
Okay.
But I don't think we're gonna come here and say that you have to. Go ahead.
You have to let them in because you haven't explicitly excluded them. They are property owners. Property owners are explicitly members.
No, the state owns the airport.
Right, she just used the state as an example. The state is a nonprofit. They are explicitly a member. The airport is an organization, and I expect it's incorporated.
Yeah, business
It has a
owners-
business license. It is explicitly a member.
Does it have a business license? The airport?
Something.
See, I didn't know,
It can't- It can't exist in limbo.
How about the Alaska
Well,
Railroad?
listen-
That's equally impacting, so.
I think councils make that decision themselves.
They are explicitly members under what you've got drafted here.
I don't think so.
How about Health and Human Services that is gonna own the Longhouse in Turnagain area? Do they get a vote? Because they own the property.
But only one vote.
No, it's a nonprofit that's going to.
We have Al over here wanting to make.
Yeah, yeah.
I believe that they come under the tax exempt status under federal law.
Yeah.
Just let them
Yeah.
vote.
But they only get one
vote
vote.
makes a difference.
I think most councils would be happy if somebody, an organization like the airport, that's in their council area, comes and says, we want to be a member, we want to participate.
But that's not my point, though. My point was, the way this is written now, does that include the airport? And that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yes.
I think it covers it.
Absolutely.
And Vic's saying yes,
They are
and so,
tax
so
exempt.
they're considered a business owner, because the sentence starts out, business owners and nonprofits must possess one of the following.
They can bring it.
And that members are property owners, business owners, and nonprofit organizations. So I mean, I'm, in the
Let's let you
context of how
discuss
this is
That
written.
begs the question, federal government too,
Yep.
also?
Yep. Business,
Any-
property owner.
Non-tax exempt status, federal government would be tax
Okay.
exempt. I mean, that's how I think that you can
Right.
manage that.
Okay.
That's what I think that is.
So,
about.
it's, those four bullets are in the context of property owners, business owners, and nonprofit organizations. Then they have to show they're one of the four bullets. So
Yeah, that's a
airports
validation.
are a property owner, a business owner, or a nonprofit?
You're gonna be a
You're saying-
business owner
Business owner.
And a property.
and a property owner.
So an extreme
Okay.
example, Portage Valley Community Council is 99% government-owned land, okay? And it's Alaska Railroad government-owned land, and it's not National Park,
BLM.
BOM, the Forest Service land, okay? And then there's very few number of parcels there. But my understanding is even though they may own 100 different parcels there, they still only get one vote. So they would be represented not by property owners, the property owner portion, but by the institution portion. So that's an extreme. I don't think there are any other councils that are so dominated by the government as that. And you are certainly dominated by that big institution, but there are ones up on the hillside that are dominated by others as well.
Yeah.
By the way, for clarification, the state of Alaska is not tax exempt. I've got that right from the state of Alaska on their website.
Kathy, you definitely want participation by the airport.
But that wasn't my
allow a
point.
vote.
My
Don't
point
get-
was, the way this is written, does it include, could it include an airport?
Take a look at it, let's move on.
Put it in
That
your
was my question.
bylaws and then have us
Okay.
decide whether or not it's legal.
All right, I'll.
Moving on to 7,
we'll
Julia.
just-
Can I ask one question before you go on? Following this discussion, can these government agencies hold board positions? And when you open this up to, this discussion up to who has property, who owns the highways and right-of-ways through your property, it's gonna open it up to the, that seems like, to me, that brings in the Department of Transportation, highways and on into the night. So I think you ought to give us some pretty good thought to what you're saying here. If this is open up to the general, open up to governmental agencies to have members of your community council. Membership entitles them to be on the boards, I would think, unless you specifically exclude them.
Okay, so let's go back to what Dick said, is that, what Dick Tremaine said, and what you're saying is that if they're not excluded, then they're included. I'm just the drafter, so what is the consensus here on how you want to do it?
Al?
Because, wait a minute, because one suggestion would be that I could put something in here that would say that government entities who own property within the area are subject to special recognition by the community council, and you push it to the community council to figure out if that's a thing, but you actually have a prohibition unless the community council has a gatekeeper. So, Al?
I would say that if it becomes a problem, then we can come back and address it.
I'm the new guy here, so I can say nutty things, but has this, you've had community councils for eons. Has this ever been a problem?
No.
Never.
Okay, so there's your answer. I agree.
Right.
And I think it goes back to the charter, maximum participation.
Sure. Let's move on. We gotta get going.
Before we move on, could I ask two quick questions for clarification? It has to do with what the assembly passes, what's mandatory and what you can put in your bylaws. Under B, is that voting members immediately after signing membership, and our current bylaw says that you have to join in one meeting before you can vote in the next meeting. That way we don't have a special issue and then everybody comes, signs up, votes, and leaves. Will that become mandatory, or do we still have the option to address that in our bylaws?
It would be mandatory, except the councils will have the option of having prior meeting attendance requirements for election of officers.
Okay, so we can keep our current requirements now?
No.
No, we can't.
No, if this passes as written, the draft, anybody who qualifies to be a member of a council, they show up, they sign in.
They can vote that
They
night?
can vote that night.
Okay, so that's a mandatory, that'll change it.
Yes.
The second one on the dues, we currently collect $5 a year, and this is for the post office and mailings and other stuff. And as a requirement under our bylaws, under these now, this would be strictly voluntary, it can no longer be a requirement.
Right.
Right, and there's a legal analysis or consideration to support that.
Okay.
And that is that you are in effect making a poll tax.
Okay, so
And that was
currently,
struck
as
down.
we have it written, it wouldn't pass muster.
Yeah,
The new
yeah,
proposal.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and so that's why we're encouraging, under C to have voluntary, but you can't condition it on your vote.
If we don't collect, if we have zero participation in the voluntary and we don't collect anything, how do we pay for our post office box and other things that make us function?
At our council, we passed the hat.
Well, I know that.
And you hit up businesses and people
If it
that
comes
have
back
deep
to
pockets.
zero, then what happens?
A lot of businesses that have active participation in your community council will donate money. That's at least what Sand Lake, has.
We actually have a different rate for businesses, but that's okay. We may have a different rate for government, but, okay. I just wanted to, these are mandatory if it passes.
Right, and that one, I don't think is gonna be, that one on the dues doesn't have, is both policy and a legal call.
Thank you.
So on C, if I may, if we say it's voluntary, then why do we have to limit it to $15 or even mention a limit? Just say, they may
Because
ask.
I think it's in the
they-
charter.
They may ask for voluntary dues, but no council shall
Now,
charge.
where's the $15
The
come from?
$15 came out of the last code rewrite in 2005, wasn't it, Dick?
Right.
That they put in there, you capped them at 15, but that's a good point.
If it's voluntary, doesn't it just
Yeah.
make it one sentence? It may establish voluntary dues, but no, but the council may not charge dues or require da-da-da.
So you just take out not to exceed $15.
Just make it,
Yeah.
ask for 100 and.
Good point.
get 50, that's great.
How about minimum 15? Just,
Up the ante a little bit.
That's in your non-default bylaws.
Down to 7, Julia?
Okay. Number 7, we're now on meetings.
By the way, ma'am, how long can you be with us? You said you had a time
Yeah,
constraint.
I'm supposed to be upstairs, but I think we're just gonna have to get through this, because how else am I gonna know what you're doing?
Yes, okay. Let's move.
I've got,
I think Article 7 is fine.
I've got a comment on D. I know that we talked about this in
Article what?
previous,
Same one.
page 4D, at the top, that minutes shall be taken or recording shall be made at all regular and special council meetings and shall be made available at the next council meeting. I thought we talked about this and said we're all volunteers and sometimes secretaries don't quite get things done or the
Well-
board doesn't. And we talked about this and so I strenuously oppose that
Well-
just because Turnagain is guilty of not doing that.
Once
sometimes.
again, we're talking about the ordinance versus the bylaws. And we had that discussion internally too, and in the ordinance, it doesn't require that they be available at the
Okay,
next,
so this one-
next meeting. But out of the 34 sets of bylaws I looked at, I think every one of them required that the minutes be available at the next meeting. So this is practice of what most community councils do, and
If you don't do it, shame on you.
Well,
Yeah,
I
and
agree
once-
that it
once-
should be
once
done that
again-
way.
once
But
again-
that word shall.
once again, maybe that will be an incentive if there are councils out there that say you can take 2 or 3 months to have the minutes available, then they better make sure they get their bylaws done within 7 months, so this doesn't apply to that.
I don't see it in Turnagain's bylaws.
Well, but it's in,
So-
like I said, out of 34 bylaws, I would say 30 of them have.
So I'm just saying, we didn't talk about, we talked about how we're all volunteer and so this part would not be mandatory. This is
These
a,
are,
It's not in the code, but
Not
it's,
if you get your bylaws
it's standard
done,
practice for councils.
okay, thank you.
It's good business practice
I
that
totally
that
agree.
Daryl has incorporated into the default.
I totally
Because
agree.
we don't want to put bad business practice in the default.
My concern on, we talked about that also, and, because I hate going to meetings and saying, you want to approve the minutes, and they're not,
When you're proving there's nothing.
you can't review them. And so, what I suggest, under notices, part F, put in the agenda, the draft agenda and previous month's draft minutes. Put the draft minutes in there, online, and at least they have something they can look at. And then you can work on getting it approved once you get all the little T's and I's taken care
So
of.
throw salt in the wound is what you're saying.
Pardon?
Throw salt in Kathy's wound by adding an additional requirement down here under F.
That's right.
Notices,
We're
draft
moving on to that
agenda and
section
draft.
Yeah,
We were on D.
huh?
We were on D.
We're not finished with that yet?
Well,
I get there now, aren't we?
No, just
So-
moved on.
Well-
So Daryl, do you, just to shorten this up, is that also the kind of thing about the draft minutes to put in the individual bylaws?
Well, to be honest, we could take this section totally out of here. I just pulled that from a combination, and it didn't say whenever possible in the bylaws it read, but when Dick and I had an email exchange, he said, well, we're requiring people to do this, so, who's gonna do it? Who's gonna be responsible? And some councils do say that the executive board shall post, a minimum of 7 days before the meeting.
So
So
now
this
we
is
are-
more of an idea.
talking about
This
notice.
whole section can come out of the default bylaws. F. I mean, it's.
Section F.
Yeah.
Okay.
Section F.
I
Page
mean,
4,
it's-
section
It's
F.
up, it's whatever the group thinks, it's just, because to be honest, it
This
says,
is gonna be
may be done whenever possible, may be submitted. There's nothing that's required under
published
F.
in the code. And so again, if there's a conflict,
Okay, well, yeah, I didn't realize you
That
jumped on,
happens.
so, yeah, I did have a comment about
Code is
that, as
still
Mark
in Trump,
Butler
just like
well
in
knows.
Trump's regulations.
I didn't get my email version of my
hopefully we won't
agenda to
have
him
that, because
sent
not
out
all
until
councils.
yesterday.
It doesn't
And,
mean it has
and
to
we
be
meet
word for
Thursday,
word. It
and
has to be
sometimes
mandatory
things
basis.
just happen where you don't have your agenda solidified.
Till the morning
Now,
of.
this is why I'm not gonna be president after the rest of the year.
Well, for the purposes of clarity and
But,
I've heard from the
making
voters
it
in your
easier,
council
we
when they were
could just
reelected.
drop
Code
it.
doesn't require it, and it's in the exhibit.
And I
And the
also have a
exhibit's
comment
gonna
that it
rule,
doesn't,
because
if
code
we leave
doesn't
this language
require it.
in, it doesn't refer to
So
postal
conflict means
distribution,
that you actually have a code.
which I would recommend
Oh.
inserting,
Oh,
because
you
we
understand
still
what I'm
have an
saying?
FCC
Yeah.
put out postal mailings
Good
as well as.
Let's go to Merle in the back.
It complicates it.
I just had it for a while.
I want to go back to C, and my question there says, all meetings shall be open to the public. Does that mean they're?
Between a
the board
mandatory
meetings?
thing and the code, a mandatory thing, not a discretionary thing, because the code itself is.
And that would,
Some
and
discretion.
the reason I bring that up is if you got board meetings, then you must have a notice requirement, because the other meetings are public meetings, they have a notice requirement.
No, chapter 1.25, public notices does not apply to community councils. They are specifically exempted, but community councils in their bylaws can put noticing requirements, but there's nothing in code that requires
I thought
public
your
notice.
new draft ordinance had that, I haven't looked it up, I thought it had a,
It says-
it said that they had to put out notices. in the
No, it
meeting.
says they're open to the public, but there's no noticing requirement.
Well, they didn't have to give any notice when they're gonna have their meetings.
Community councils are specifically excluded from the public noticing requirements.
Right, but anyway, the other thing is, I just point out that that's, we talk about public meeting, when they have a public meeting, is that a public meeting? The boards?
Well, I thought we had some discussion that executive boards could go into executive session.
I'm talking about just the regular meeting, board meetings, Mr.
Well, you can have whatever you want, you know, in your bylaws.
Yeah.
But if you adopt these here, then these things can be applicable.
You don't adopt new ones in 7 months.
It just says, but it says all meetings shall be open to the public.
So you want to say council meetings or
Well, I don't
council
know what
and
they're
board
gonna- They
meetings?
say all the meetings are open to the public, I'm just asking. the
In
question.
the ordinances, I believe it says all general and special meetings are all meetings.
It says regular and special meetings.
Regular and special meetings.
Right. So
So-
you have a board meeting and it's, oh, it's
We
excluded.
change that language to reflect that in here.
Okay, so where,
These are draft bylaws.
Where-
Your
It's on
bylaws
C.
can say which-
on C, all meetings shall be open to the public.
All council, special and regular council meetings shall be,
Okay,
whatever the word is.
so Daryl, what are you thinking?
Well, I think once again, we're gonna have trouble finding default bylaws that are gonna cover every potential issue. And most councils' bylaws say that all meetings shall be open to the public. So once again, perhaps this would be an incentive to councils who would like their executive board to have executive sessions to adopt new bylaws within 7 months. I mean, to me, it's just good public policy that all meetings are open to the public. But
I don't think it's a problem. You know, I haven't had a problem with it. Anybody else?
Attendance is more of a problem than too many people not.
All right, so in terms
But I
of,
understand the concern.
Well, just for your information, sir, I have had problems, and so I would, I point that out, that it's hard to get things on the agenda a lot of times, you can't, and if you go to a board meeting, they do not have any obligation to recognize you or let you talk, or hear what you have to say, and if you're not in the in-group, you don't get to address the issues in the meeting, open meeting, and ask that it be on the next agenda either, so there's all those kinds of issues can come up, and here you're talking about, you know, you're talking about making some changes here. I think we should recognize that you do have these issues that are a possibility, even if they've never come up for you before.
Item C, then, you could simply cite the ordinance.
But the ordinance actually says regular and special meetings. It doesn't include executive board meetings because for 40 years, the municipality has recognized and given responsibility for almost everything to do with officers on the executive board, their qualification, their election, their duties, terms of office has been left to the councils themselves. So that would be, I think, a fundamental change if we tried to start managing how the executive board operates. I don't know, what do you, Dick, what do you
Bylaws,
think?
well, the other thing, I mean, we put in the regular meetings and special meetings shall be properly noticed, and a record shall be made, and all that, in the ordinance. For the you know, the actual technicality is that even if you say that all meetings shall be open to the public, that's probably technically true even if you're having an executive session, because the meeting itself has to be open to the public, and then within that meeting, there's some kind of executive session that they exclude people, and that's really up to the community council to decide how they want to do that and get that passed. So I'm sort of with Daryl on this one, that this is about public policy for all the reasons that the gentleman in the back has you know, indicated, and that if the community council wants to be more explicit and go into a description about how they want to have that operate in terms of that, then they need to put that in their bylaws and get it approved. Otherwise, you have, you don't have you may have access issues, as the gentleman in the back has indicated.
Just Jernigan Community Council handles it that on every agenda that I produced as president, where I have announcements, meeting notices, I say when our next board meeting is. So it's a minimum of 3 weeks' notice. So their notice.
Well, I think he was talking about open to the public. It
What
was sort of
items
the discussion
what
about-
items would you cover under an executive session?
I've never had, as president, I've never had our board go into executive session. And anybody is welcome to attend our board meetings. They're usually full as far as agenda items for the boards to discuss. That's where Merle's frustration comes in. We meet over lunch. They're typically an hour to an hour and a half long, and then everybody leaves because they gotta go back to work. And I just have to talk fast just to get in what I need to cover with the board. And then Merle's left with a long list of things he was gonna bring up, and there wasn't any time left. So that's what Merle is referring to. I've never said nobody can attend board meetings. I've always given a minimum of 3 weeks' notice in our agenda and announcement. When they happen, he knows he can come to every one of them. And when I remember, I specifically even include him in I CC him on my emails to the board, reminding him about the board meeting. But just because we always have so much to cover, that doesn't mean that I have time to have a public at large deal with specific things.
Thank you, Kathy. Dick?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Part of what we're stumbling over here is current practice and proposed new changes to bylaws. Most of us have boards that operate if there's not a full membership meeting or that takes care of the business. As bylaws as proposed, the new ordinance as proposed, is the actions will be taken by the members at the meeting. And often, rarely, there won't be a membership quorum to have that taken. So there's going to be a lot of practice that changes. Board meetings, as I envision under the new regs, will occur when notice is given of some proposed land change, and we don't have, we have to comment before the next membership meeting or something like that. I don't think we've internalized these changes yet.
An executive board or something.
Julia?
Well, I'm just thinking that you had, Dick Trainee had said, can we change the C to say regular and special meetings? And I just don't think that we should have a change here.
Okay, then don't do it.
And so, that's where I'm thinking about
Just
that.
suggestion, Julia, not wrap
Right, no, we were all having, it was a roundtable discussion, so I'd like to close this one out by saying that we're not gonna
Okay, that's fine.
do that, if that's okay. And then, as, everybody's talking about here, there won't be, we're gonna have some practice changes, and, we've gotta get through these bylaws here this morning,
Let's
guys,
move down
so
to
let's
Article
move down.
8.
Excuse me,
Well,
so
let's
can I
get some more.
Can I get clarification on F1 then? Are we deleting that entire paragraph?
Well, I would recommend deleting it because it's not required by the code, nothing in there as far as F. It's just, I was trying to balance code requirements with some good business practice, but, it says whenever possible, shall be, may be. For clarification and to make it simpler for purposes, I think we could just drop that.
I think it's good practice.
Well, okay, well,
I think it's good guidance, so.
I'll
Whenever possible, this is what you should do.
Let's just leave it in here.
Okay.
Let's move on to 8.
well,
Well, we gotta get
I
moving,
don't think that
folks.
we're done here, so let's, I mean,
Okay.
what do we, Kathy, what?
What are my problems with F1? Is that what you?
Well, is there, I guess I was thinking that there was parts of F1 that we should keep anyway.
You know, I agree with Daryl that, you know, this is a good template, especially for councils who don't want to take a lot of effort to redo or look and
Right.
come up with their own bylaws. I think a provision for how they deal with notices is entirely appropriate. What took me by surprise was our discussions, our previous discussions, that we're all volunteers, and so sometimes things don't get done when we absolutely agree they should be. So that word "shall" concerns me. Whenever possible.
And where is that?
Whenever
In F1.
where possible, the draft agenda shall be posted online, emailed at least 7 days in advance, and.
Whenever possible, so if it's impossible, you
So,
don't.
well, I would
Okay,
say
I got
whenever
it, I'm just
possible,
gonna
the
put will,
agenda.
I'm gonna put will.
No, let's
Well,
not,
doesn't make.
yeah, let's move on, folks,
Yeah.
we gotta
But,
get going.
and then I also thought postal should be inserted there because most councils probably do both electronic and postal emails. I mean, distribution.
What is
And-
it?
Sorry, when it talks about the draft, the last sentence in the F1, the draft agenda may be submitted to the Federation of Community Councils or current municipal administrator for electronic distribution.
Or postal.
Distribution, just take up the electronic.
Yeah.
For distribution period.
For distribution,
And I'm assuming the November 1st, 2013 will change to the appropriate date in age.
No,
Moving right along.
7 years.
Yeah, so in answer to that, we wanted to pick a date, and so we didn't want a whole bunch of stuff.
that's fine, Dave.
Whatever.
Number 8?
Great.
Yeah, okay, 8.
Madam Chair, I move to approve Article 8.
Thank you, Al.
What? I've got a
Second to the
comment.
motion.
I figured so, Kathy. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Discussion?
I'm sorry, yes,
Moving right along here,
discussion,
Kathy.
thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, all those in favor?
It's better here than in front
It's
of
an
the
assembly
assembly.
committee.
So
That's
let's
the reason we
go,
have you
Kathy.
here, okay?
Yeah, I'm sure that's why you have it.
Okay, discuss,
Seriously,
Go for it.
No,
Okay, now I just wrote a note, and I'm trying to think, my note to myself when I reviewed this was, doesn't include previous attendance requirement. So,
Please CC.
what did I mean by that? Okay, have one vote, nonprofit. I'm sorry, I can't remember what I'm referring to.
did you have the same issue about airport?
Oh, no, excuse me, voting for elections. Just like you've got a requirement that you have to have attended one for all your votes, well, for turning in, you just have a requirement that they have to have attended at least once for officer elections, officer and board elections. And the way this is written now, would our caveat for officer board elections be allowed, or would that not?
Guidance, not law.
No, I don't,
These are
let's
draft.
just make sure.
So is there
that
anything in
it
the code about this,
Well-
or this is just guidance for bylaws?
I can answer that, why I didn't put it in there. That would normally, councils have voting and a lot of bylaws, and all bylaws are different. But then when it comes to officers, you talk about the election and the qualifications for voting. And because the code says councils may put prior attendance requirements, my challenge here was, do I put it in or not put it in? Because does this council want it or not want it? So, under Article 10, the council's current provision would be in effect. So, their qualifications for voting for officers that were in effect with their bylaws as of November 1st, 2013 would apply. So if that council required prior attendance, it would still apply. If they didn't, it wouldn't apply. Because I can't say under voting, it would be either or probably. So that's the way I dealt with that.
Okay, thank you, that clears it up.
okay, let's move on.
I have one comment, and I think I got it from Kathy previously. These membership rosters, to what date, or how long do we keep them? I mean, membership rosters from 10 years ago, 9 years ago, 8 years ago, or the previous year? What would you suggest?
I think that's up to the council, but the code says you may put, councils may require prior attendance within the previous 12 months.
Okay.
So, you know, I think every council.
Already.
But then, oh, sorry.
Well, I'll say, Darrell, at our last FCC meeting, we established a archival committee which is going to address all that, give the ability for the council to have their records archived. So we're working on that right now.
Okay, we've got to move on,
Well,
folks.
So for election of officers, you wouldn't be going back more than 12 months.
But then that, taking that one step broader, when the code talks about membership and requires that if you, once you sign in, you're a member, does that last forever? I mean, so somebody signed in 30 years ago is still considered a member, and then who manages that data? You know, I mean, who goes back 20 years and said, I used to live here 20 years ago and I signed in, and so I'm a member and I get to vote on this officer, you know, thing tonight. Because I attended 20 years ago. How?
They don't live there
But it
anymore.
doesn't, it
No, I
doesn't.
mean, if they move back then.
That
But
would.
hadn't
Chair,
attended the council.
That would,
Mr. Chair.
but,
So-
Article 9.
Well,
Mr. Chair,
yes, Al.
I call for the question to cut off debate.
well, no, it's a good point, but that is covered, because if you say, I came to a meeting 10 years ago, I signed in, I'm a member, I want to vote for officer. But if the council has a requirement that you had to have attended a meeting within the previous 12 months, then they would not be eligible to vote if they hadn't signed in a meeting in the previous 12 months.
Okay, that's
But
my point.
if they hadn't attended a meeting at all, they show up and sign in, they're eligible to vote except for the officers, so it's
Okay.
covered.
It's covered, and so, but when we get to the last session, then I'm gonna bring this up again, Article 14 dissolution, and it requires 3/4 of a membership, which I don't anticipate happening, but we'll get to that when we get to that, so thank you.
Anything else in Article 8? Article 9? Article 10? Article 11? Yes, which one?
Article 11.
Okay.
Again, just clarify if this is code or if this is just guideline.
Guidelines.
Okay, because right now, a committee could be formed on the spot at our meeting if something comes up and we decide right
We
then
do
and
them
there. It's not a
also, yeah.
board thing, so I just want to make sure that was
Once
just.
again,
one.
I was trying to figure out how
That's
to make
fine.
one size fits all.
Article 11?
Thank you.
That was
Article
Article
12?
Oh,
Finance, 12.
So what does special mean on special account? Does that just mean?
Slush fund.
You know, we can change that into an account. I copied it out of some council's budget.
I just wondered.
I have a comment on this, the definition or term, bank versus credit union. Our account's actually in a credit
Financial
union.
institution.
Financial institution.
Where is that, so I make sure I capture that. Oh, established bank,
Established bank, it's on page 5.
yeah, so.
It's 5,
So what are we, financial institution?
12A, where it says
I got
established
it.
bank.
Bank, you put financial institution.
Institution.
Established.
Financial institution. Of course, it was already like that.
That's a good precedent.
and I just had a quick comment. I know that we have 3 signatories on our bank account, so when it says in B, the treasurer isn't available, the president can sign a check. We actually have another board member who can do it as well, but if that's not code, it's just guideline.
Yeah, just guidelines.
Okay.
Some require 2, some require 3.
Okay, moving on to 13, amendments.
That could be.
Down to 14.
13.
You have a 13 problem, Kathy?
Well, I don't know about a problem.
Just tell us, Kathy.
I've got a question. When it says proposed bylaw changes must be noticed and discussed at a minimum of 1 council meeting prior to the meeting, I mean, that's not what our bylaws require now. It does require 30 days notice of the change, but not that we have had to have discussed it at a previous meeting.
This is not in code.
So, okay, that's,
But I think it's good practice.
It is.
and then also I had a question with the last sentence. It says within 45 days of approval by the membership We have to file the amendment to the city clerk as required by Muni Code. But then remind me then what happens next. Ultimately, does the assembly have to approve that bylaw change?
It would go to the assembly with an AIM, I believe, and will be accepted by the assembly, the bylaws. Or by the rules committee.
You know, I mean, that language might be appropriate to add to that, because it just kind of leaves it in limbo. We voted on the change, we submit it to the clerk, and then you're kind of left in limbo as far as your bylaws. So if the bylaws can go ahead and say what happens next, so that we know as a council when our change, assuming it's approved, knows when it can be, applicable, when it's.
If I might, these are bylaws, and you can't dictate what another outside organization is going to do, so that's inappropriate. Secondly, and the municipality needs to remember this, some of these organizations exist under state charter, and when they make bylaw change, they've made a bylaw change, and that's that. You got no say about it. You can disavow them as a community council, but it is not up to you
You want to
to,
look at legality.
it is not up to you to approve the bylaw change.
So we took that into consideration and hopefully have covered that by the difference between an acceptance and an approval.
Yes.
And so that's why he mentioned the AIM, because we gotta accept it into the file, and,
That's bylaws.
and I think that what Kathy was saying was just to maybe refer,
Refer to code.
refer to code or add some of the language into code so they're just not hanging there, but without repeating the whole code section. So I made a note about that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so are there other ways to, on 14, are there other ways to dissolve? I hadn't looked at dissolution, like by the board instead of by the general membership or something, Daryl?
Once
Or
again,
Al?
After him, Al.
Once again, this isn't, it's required by code that there be provisions for dissolution of the council, but the actual mechanics are left up to the councils. So different councils have different language in this section.
Okay, Al,
Al.
Which one?
On,
this one's your first article.
on article number 14, dissolution, I would like to see the word Federation of Community Council scratched out. Why, if we have funds left over, should we give consideration? I think the other language, the other nonprofits, I think would be more appropriate.
Because the Federation is a nonprofit, so that's fine. It's included there anyway.
It does say are other such,
Yeah.
Municipal
He
contract.
said-
are others, are such other nonprofit organization as designated
Yeah,
designated in the.
Or just any nonprofit organization.
All right, so Al, in the last clause there, oh, okay, so you don't want such other, you just want or other, because you don't want it to have to be, so I think that works. We'll just take out such. And so read that now, that last clause, for community council use or other nonprofit organization if designated in the dissolution action.
Right.
Does that give you enough flexibility there?
I think so, and scratch out Federation of Community.
We're not gonna scratch out federation because it's an or,
Oh, okay, okay.
Right?
Good, good.
right? So it's the federation or other contractor that's in the federation's place if something happens there,
Okay.
or other nonprofit organization if designated in the,
Good,
okay, does that work?
good.
Yeah, Al, we got Al 2 over here.
Other Al.
Yeah.
Like I said before, right now, we're working on archival procedures, so if the council gets dissolved, they can donate the money, I guess, to Salvation Army, whatever. But then they have the records and stuff too, they need to get rid of those, and that's where our archival committee is working on procedures now, so I was thinking donation, add a paragraph at the very end.
I think that's a good idea, so you wanna have, so we wanna have we can
Well-
include a line to say that the.
Donation shall be made to the University of Alaska Archive, that's where special collections, ANSW, according with our existing deposit agreement, should the ANSC dissolve, the records will be transferred to SCC or current municipal administrator for public use. So the record get archived or they get put someplace for
But that's
historical
not part of
purposes.
the code.
Okay, do you want to send me that?
Yeah.
Or is there something you want to give to me? Okay.
Yeah, I think it protects integrity.
Okay, so we might want to shorten it up a little bit, but the point is that we have monetary assets, and then we also have the paperwork, and you want to make sure that that's not left in somebody's garage.
And don't say paperwork, it's records, whether it's electronic or.
Yeah, you want to keep the records in Kathy's garage.
Kathy didn't have any room.
I made.
She's got all the airport documents there.
Trust me, it's good news.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any on the bylaws, but I have one little
Back on
edit
code.
on the
Okay.
page 5 and 15.
Okay, 5 and 15 on the code.
Yeah, the very last sentence, community councils shall file bylaws through the office of municipal.
Oh, yeah, we wanted to talk about that. Yes, good idea. Okay, so you said it's on 5. Which line?
44.
Last
Okay,
line.
my 5 doesn't have 44 pages. I mean, doesn't have line 44.
Page 5 and 15.
Under
I have
council,
5
council
Yeah.
bylaw.
What did you pass out?
I was just what was in the stack there.
Why doesn't mine have the same?
It's a mystery, I cannot answer that.
And work with the
Okay.
copy.
All right, so let's look at
Make
this.
sure.
Yeah, that's that. Well, fortunately, that isn't what we were talking about. Okay.
Municipal.
Okay, so Violet through
The opposite
the,
of municipal.
okay, okay.
I just think-
So we actually got 2 things. Okay, so Daryl, this says, community council shall file bylaws through the office of municipal blank.
Isn't it the municipal
City
clerk?
clerk.
City clerk, I thought.
Yeah, it's the clerk.
Okay.
That's what I assumed, but I didn't know.
Clerk, for acceptance by the assembly. Then there's another, where's the other clerk filing that we're supposed to talk about today?
That is page.
So this does require an acceptance
Yeah, an
by
acceptance.
the assembly.
Yeah,
So
because
everybody
the-
understands that? That's a significant shift here.
Yeah, you can't
Gives the assembly
establish your own
control over the.
country.
No, it says that in the 2005 ordinance. It's not
Okay, well, I
in.
didn't say it's a significant shift in the paperwork,
It
the
says
law, I'm
it's-
saying it's never been done to my knowledge.
Yeah, well,
It
that's
was
part of the
supposed to have been
problem.
done, it was supposed to have been done in 2005. It says to be recognized and maintain recognition.
Right,
Your bylaws.
right. I was just letting everyone know, that's a big difference here,
But in
and that's
the,
gonna change.
it's not a difference in the code, but it's the fact that we're actually gonna follow up at the
Yes,
city
sir.
level.
You said it far better than I did.
You know, I wasn't at the meeting, I was on vacation for 2 months, but Steve, John Cecil gave you everything, I understand. I got the slide right here.
He's right there. That's Jeff.
Oh, your job, okay, hi, John. I thought, like, my understanding that once we did this, they were supposed to give it to you for review, and then you process it on.
For the boundary review.
Well, that's strictly boundaries.
That's just strictly boundaries only.
He's doing boundary, one-time boundary.
Gotcha, okay.
Then he's on to other projects.
Hi, glad to meet you.
Okay, someplace in our code, there's a reference that,
I'm trying to find it.
that the, community council will give, so in code, it's on page 7, and it is number 9 on page 7, so it's E, it's following through from the prior pages, so it's something E. It's 240-036 Community Council Bylaws, and it is number 7, number 9.
Number 9, notice the office of municipal clerk.
Yeah, of a change in the designated contact for direct notice to the community council or a change in legal status of the community council. So in Ferg has pointed out that current practice now may be, and Mark, this is something about your situation, for the community, for the federation that the municipal clerk looks to the federation, and that now, Mark, can you participate in this part of the conversation?
Yes, ma'am, I
with
am.
us?
Go ahead.
Okay, so we're looking at, on page 7 of 15, number 9, Mark.
Yes, ma'am.
And the clerk has pointed out that this may represent a redundancy, that the current practice now is that the community councils inform the Federation of Community Councils who the designated party is.
These are bylaws.
Right?
Bylaws should go to an entity that is the governing entity, and so it should be the clerk. The federation is
Okay, I'm on a different thing, okay?
Not
This
really.
is, no, this is a requirement in your bylaws.
Correct.
Okay,
The federation is a contractor to the municipality. There's nothing to say that next year will be the contract to the municipality. The bylaws should say notice should go to the municipal clerk.
Right.
Oh, even for
Okay.
contact. the change
okay,
in contact
Daryl,
information.
I need everybody on
Yep.
board. We made a commitment, Daryl.
Here's.
Yeah, and
here's-
you told everybody that in the meeting that we were in, that you did not think that this should be in here. And now
I
you're
don't.
getting feedback that says that it should be, so you need to.
There's a couple of issues with this. The clerk's office believes that the federation is contracted. One of the requirements of the contract is they maintain the contact list, an updated
Yes.
contact list.
Yes, sir.
So the clerk's office, to send notices, uses the federation contact list.
Fantastic.
Yes, sir.
So the clerk believes it would be redundant. It hasn't been in the code before and doesn't support this. Thinks it's a redundancy that, the assembly is paying, granting money every year. And that's one of the things.
$80,000 this year.
And one of the important pieces of that is maintain an updated contact list. So she thought that was a redundancy and it was unnecessary. And as far as the change in legal status, whether a council's incorporated or not, I just don't think, this came up because of the potential for direct community revenue sharing. And that's a state program, so it'd be up to the state to make sure whether or not a council's incorporated and if their incorporation is current. And if we start implementing that program, which could bring millions to the city, the state mandates that the local government actually manage the project, the process, so the money won't go directly to the councils, it'd be managed by the city. So if it's Public Works or whoever, it seems like it'd be more their responsibility to deal with the status of things. It's just, really, is it the clerk's responsibility or even their business to know whether or not a council's incorporated?
So the question is, should it be part of the bylaws?
Yeah, two things about that. So on the change in legal status of a community council came up because we weren't reporting that anyplace. And it turns out that there may be more efficient ways to find out if they're incorporated or not. And so that piece, the clerk recommends that be deleted, and I believe that, Daryl, you support that.
Yes, well, the discussion we had this morning was there are more efficient ways to do it, and it's just something, do we need it in code?
No.
Right, so we take that, so we
It's a
take out the
contract.
change in legal status.
Yes.
Then the second part of that question is within the same provision, now shortened and amended, so that it only says notice to the office of municipal clerk of a change in the designated contact for direct notice to the community councils, is A, do we need to have that at all? And B, should it be in the bylaws if we have it? And Dick, I had thought that it was important that it go to the clerk because I saw the FCC as basically a contractor through the clerk's office, and therefore the contract designee to receive that. And so from a transactions point of view, I looked at it that way. But I'm totally willing to look at it any other way, but we said we would take it to the group.
Mr. Chairman, if it's in the code, it has to be the way written, it's municipal clerk. But I'm not sure it needs to be in the code. So it's a policy call.
Daryl, from your perspective?
Take it out.
I don't think the clerk needs to do that. They hired a contractor to do
Just
that
take it
for
out.
us, and it's a legal requirement for us, so I think that.
Just take it out.
The only real need would be if another group says, no, I'm the Eagle River Community Council. And, no, and there's competition to be that representative.
Okay.
But there never has been in the 40 years, has there?
They have
Al,
to be
Dick?
recognized by the Senate.
That's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
Now, maintain those records,
On the website, 24/7.
and
So,
Okay, we done?
I think there was only one change
I think we're done.
in this draft, is on page 10 of 15, line 17 and 18. And I think that was based on some comments Kathy had at the last meeting.
That's page what, 11?
10 of 15, line 17 and 18, in bold and underlined. That's the only change from the last draft.
yes, sir.
I have a question. Like I say, I wasn't here last couple of meetings, but under page 8-15, paragraph, I'll take it, 8-15.
On the ordinance or the bylaws?
This
Which
is
line?
the ordinance. Under paragraph 15, I was wondering about another paragraph. My concern is that we don't get any solicitation from petitions or people trying to push their certain items where we have during our meetings. So, add another subparagraph, community council shall not allow serious meetings. Any local, state, or federal petitions, such may be circulated, such petition may be circulated prior or after the meeting. Basically, you can't do petitions or you can't, do anything that's outside of a regular meeting, information. You can't circulate petition, you can't have any, I think the word now.
I think that's a slippery slope, because one of the important, I think, things that community councils do is hold candidate forums, allow people to talk about school bonds or bond issues or, and initiatives. I mean, you can have procedures where they can't collect signatures during the meeting.
That's what I'm talking about.
But
Pass
that's,
petitions around.
that's a procedural issue, how you conduct your meeting. If they have to do it before or after the meeting or at the break, put that.
I would say that's a perfect example of what you can put in your discretionary bylaws that decide how you're gonna run your meetings. But as far as code is concerned, as Daryl said, we don't wanna preclude, some community councils are gonna want to use and specifically schedule
Well, I agree
candidate
with that.
forums.
If you schedule for the meetings, they come here to talk about schools, whatever, that's great. My concern, but we've had a politician circulate a petition during our meeting, actually after the
So
signature.
co-opt your meeting to do that?
He just said, if you don't mind, could I pass the petition around? Which I don't like that. That disrupts the meeting.
Then a
everything
member
else.
raises their hand and says, point of order, Madam Chair or Mr. Chair, I object. I think that's inappropriate to circulate that. It's up to the membership. A lot of things with the way councils operate, and, people come to the clerk's office or they come to the Assembly members or my office complaining about the way their council operates or what their president does, and my response is, then run for president. Or raise your hand and say, point of order. Or know what your bylaws say and say, point of order, our bylaws say. It's
Right,
not
so
up to
that-
the city to micromanage council.
This even happened during the FCC meeting one time, a few months ago.
that
Right,
happens
so-
on the assembly all the time.
No, but I think it's totally appropriate for you to figure out in the bylaws how you want to manage, or have the bylaws say we'll have rules of procedure, and then have a rule of procedure that could, because it is disruptive to a meeting, just like I had to reel Mark in here for a second. If somebody's busy signing a petition and paying attention to your candidate, you can't get your regular business done.
Well, thank all of you guys for being here. This will be introduced probably the first meeting in December, so we have time yet. Thank you, guys.
And we will take testimony.
Yes, we will.
I think the meeting